This happened in 2019 when I was working in Tokyo, Japan. I had moved to a place called Setagaya Ward. I loved it because it was a quiet city and it was only a 20-minute train ride to Tokyo. The house was an old 2-story house, but the problem was the neighbor next door. The door was red and rusted, as if no one had lived there for a long time, and the area in front was overgrown with knee-high weeds. The owner of that house must always be walking through those weeds. Every day when I left my house, I looked at the house next door and thought of that. The reason I was certain the house wasn't abandoned was because I had already asked the landlord when I moved in. The landlord told me about the man who lived there, who only slept there once a week or once a month. Other than that, the house was mostly empty, and she wasn't sure why. I felt uneasy, but I just brushed it off. Then one day, exhausted from work, I was walking home when I glanced over at my neighbor's house and saw a dark silhouette standing in the window. The figure was staring at me. I was startled for a moment, but then I turned my head away, pretended not to see him, and went back inside. A moment later, someone knocked on my front door. I asked who was outside, and a man told me in Japanese that he was my neighbor. I was momentarily lost in thought. Honestly, I didn't want to open the door, so for about 5 minutes, I stood in silence, trying to decide what to do. Silence flowed, and I couldn't tell if he was still there or if he had left. And then the silence continued, and I finally assumed he had left, and I felt a little relieved. The next day, as I was leaving for work, my heart nearly stopped, because on the wall next to my front door was written in red, Henry, my name. It looked like it was written in red lipstick. I couldn't figure out how he knew my name. I suddenly remembered my landlord and felt a surge of anger. She was the only person I could imagine would know. I called her and got angry out of the blue. She, in a dumbfounded voice, said she'd never spoken to my neighbor. I thought she was lying, but there was nothing I could do, so I just let it slide. A few days later, the weeds that had once overgrown my neighbor's house were all neatly mowed. And then one day, I finally ran into my neighbor outside. He looked straight at me and shouted something in Japanese, his voice sharp and aggressive. I wasn't very good at it, so I couldn't understand. I just smiled awkwardly and waved at him. But I can't forget his face at that moment. It was filled with utter rage. I couldn't figure out what I had done wrong. I was just panicked and felt sweat drip down my back, but the man's expression was nothing but utter rage. It was a weekend a while later. I usually slept in until noon on weekends, so I was sleeping that day too. Suddenly, a loud noise outside my front door woke me up. At first, I couldn't tell what it was, but when I listened closely, I realized it was a chainsaw. The loud, whirring noise was right in front of my door. Then I heard a loud knock on the door. My heart raced. I had a gut feeling it was him, my neighbor. He stood there with the chainsaw running, revving it again and again. What was he planning? I didn't open the door, but he stood there for a long moment, continuing to rev the chainsaw. I yelled that I was calling the police, but he didn't seem to hear me over the noise of the chainsaw. I was terrified, but after a while, he left. A short time later, the police arrived and spoke with the man, who told them he'd only come to talk to me and that he'd used the chainsaw to cut down a tree in his yard. After that day, I decided to talk to my landlord and move elsewhere. I'll never forget the last time I moved. As I was loading my belongings onto the truck, I saw him standing in his window. He was looking at me with a smile. He was holding something in his hand, a small, rabbit-like animal, limp and dripping fresh blood. I was so shocked that I quickly packed my belongings and left. I never returned. To this day, I still don't know who that man was or what he wanted from me, but one thing is certain, he wasn't just strange, he was dangerous.